Video games have long served as portals to otherworldly realms, but some of the most intriguing and unsettling experiences arise from dreamlike digital landscapes. These worlds, often surreal and unpredictable, blur the line between reality and nightmare, drawing players into environments that both feel familiar and deeply wrong. Hostile dreamscapes in video games are surreal, disorienting environments that weaponize atmosphere, abstraction, and psychological unease to create a uniquely haunting experience. These digital spaces invoke dread through warped logic, looping architecture, and the overwhelming feeling that the world itself is incorrect. Time breaks. Space folds. Gravity becomes optional. Players find themselves wandering through fragmented realities filled with cryptic symbols, liminal emptiness, and sounds that echo like distant memories. These dreamscapes aren't just visual, they're emotional, pulling from themes of isolation, subconscious fear, and mental unraveling. All of the games and topics we'll be discussing in this video thrive in this space by rejecting direct conflict, and instead immerses players in experiences that feel personal, uncanny, and deeply unsettling. These environments become reflections of a fractured psyche, where familiar places feel unfamiliar, and every hallway might loop back into your own subconscious. In this way, hostile dreamscapes serve not just as settings, but as a narrative device. Dreams just don't feel real, but hostile to your presence. In this video, we'll first take a look at the originators that dove into the eerie world of hostile dreamscapes. From cult classics like LSD Dream Emulator and Yume Nikki, to games running on the Source engine like Gary's Mod.
Oh god, no. You can't.
You can't what?
You can't.
And the enigmatic game you can't play, Petscop. We'll examine how these games and more create unease through warped spaces, liminal horror, uncanny atmospheres, as well as the role of PS1 style graphics in heightening these senses of unease. Prepare to step into the strange, the unsettling, and the unknowable. Welcome to the world of hostile dreamscapes. Two of the earliest and most influential examples of hostile dreamscapes in gaming are LSD Dream Emulator and Yume Nikki. These games immerse players in surreal and nightmarish environments that defy traditional game design. LSD Dream Emulator was inspired by a dream journal from a co-worker of famous Japanese artist Osamu Sato that presents an ever-shifting world where each playthrough generates unpredictable experiences. Players wander through bizarre landscapes filled with unsettling imagery, floating faces, distorted architecture, and sudden jarring transitions that feel more like intrusive thoughts than level changes. Yume Nikki places players in the shoes of Maratsuki, a young shut-in who explores her dreams, encountering eerie, looping environments and cryptic figures, like the infamous Uboa. Neither title relies on direct threats or combat. Instead, the fear comes from the overwhelming sense of isolation, the disjointed nature of their worlds, and the creeping realization that nothing behaves as expected. These early Dreamscape games laid the foundation for an entire subgenre of digital surrealism, proving that horror can be just as effective when it is abstract and psychological, rather than overtly terrifying. Building upon the foundations laid by LSD Dream Emulator and Yume Nikki, more of these experiences based on the digital realm started to appear.
This is just to prove to you that I'm not lying about this game that I found.
Petscop exists in a unique space between game and internet mystery. Presented as a series of YouTube videos documenting a supposedly unfinished PlayStation game, Petscop lures viewers in with a facade of a lost, whimsical title, before quickly unraveling into something far more sinister. Petscop presents a stylized, layered narrative, gradually revealing a disturbing story about a missing child, psychological trauma, and a mysterious locale called the Gift Plane. As the player explores deeper, the cheerful surface gives way to eerie, cryptic environments and messages that hint at abuse, reincarnation, and a broken family history, all told through the fragmented gameplay and unsettling silence. The game world is filled with abandoned, lifeless environments, cryptic messages, and an overarching narrative that suggests deep psychological horror lurking beneath its innocent exterior. Much like LSD Dream Emulator and Yume Nikki, Petscop thrives on a sense of unease that comes not only from overt horror elements, but from the creeping realization that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. These digital interpretations of hostile dreamscapes push the boundaries on what horror and gaming can be, proving that the most unsettling experiences often stem from not jump scares or grotesque monsters, but from the feeling of being lost in a world that refuses to make sense. The evolution of hostile dreamscapes in gaming intersects with a broader cultural fascination: liminal horror. Liminal spaces, the places between, are locations that feel eerily empty, transitional, or frozen in time, and have been long associated with a sense of unease. But it wasn't until the rise of internet horror that they became a distinct aesthetic and a storytelling device. This subgenre thrives on environments that feel familiar yet strangely wrong, invoking a sense of displacement rather than direct fear. One of the most well-known manifestations of liminal horror is the backrooms, an internet-born phenomenon that began as a single unsettling image of an seemingly endless, empty office space. First posted on 4chan in 2019, the backrooms quickly evolved into a collaborative horror mythos, describing a vast, inescapable labyrinth beyond reality, where time and logic break down. The concept resonated with audiences, inspiring countless adaptations in video games, short films, and online unfiction. Unlike traditional horror, which often relies on tangible threats, the backroom invokes fear through isolation, sensory dissonance, and the implied presence of something lurking just out of sight. This new fascination with liminality has also spilled into gaming. For example, indie game Interior Worlds, where you explore the eerie potential of liminality and the forgotten digital spaces. These games embrace the unsettling power of emptiness, reinforcing the idea that horror isn't always about what's chasing you. It's sometimes about the quiet, creeping realization that you may never find your way back home. Interior Worlds is a great example of how liminal horror and hostile dreamscapes intersect in modern gaming. The game places the player in vast, empty, by definition, liminal spaces, abandoned malls, empty hotels, and dimly lit parking garages that feel both familiar and unsettling. These places between places aren't traditionally threatening, yet they invoke an eerie sense of isolation, as if something just beyond the player's vision is watching them. The game's main mechanic involves using a camera to quote-unquote capture the strange anomalies within these spaces, and adds another layer of unease, reinforcing the idea that reality in interior worlds is unstable, shifting in ways that can't fully be understood. Interior Worlds taps into the fear of being lost in a space that refuses to behave logically, a perfect representation of both liminal horror and the disorienting nature of hostile dreamscapes. The Haunted PS1 demo discs are a collection of indie horror games that embrace the eerie, low-poly aesthetic of the original PlayStation era. These collections serve as a love letter to the unsettling qualities of early 3D graphics, where jagged polygons, low-resolution textures, and heavy fog weren't just technical limitations, but tools for crafting an uncanny atmosphere. In the context of hostile dreamscapes, this visual style enhances the feeling of disorientation and unease, making environments feel both familiar and strangely artificial, like fragmented memories or half-forgotten dreams. The graphical constraints of PS1-era horror games, such as limited draw distances and simple character models, unintentionally contributed to their eerie, dreamlike qualities. When modern indie horror games intentionally replicate these visuals, they tap into a specific kind of nostalgia-driven unease, one that feels like revisiting an old game from childhood, only to realize that something is wrong. This is especially effective in the Haunted PS1 demo disc collections, where each game presents a different take on psychological horror, liminality, and surreal digital landscapes. The blocky, imprecise graphics leave room for interpretation, allowing the player's imagination to fill the gaps, much like how dreams distort reality in unsettling ways. By embracing this aesthetic, Haunted PS1 demo discs don't just recreate the look of older games, they amplify the themes of hostile dreamscapes, where nothing feels quite real, yet everything carries an inexplicable sense of dread. These games prove that horror doesn't always need realism. Sometimes, the most effective scares come from the uncanny imperfections of digital worlds that feel like they were never meant to be explored. Originally intended as a physics sandbox for players to build an experiment, Garry's Mod has evolved into a massive platform for user-generated content, including some of the eeriest and most atmospheric liminal spaces in gaming. Through community-created maps inspired by the backrooms, dead malls, abandoned hotels, and infinite office spaces, Garry's Mod has become an unlikely haven for dreamlike horror. These custom environments, often eerily empty and oppressively quiet, thrive on minimalist storytelling. There's rarely any traditional gameplay. No monsters, no objectives, just the player, alone, wandering through architecture that loops on itself or tapers off into darkness. Horror here isn't overt. It's ambient. It's in the fluorescent buzz of ceiling lights, the peeling wallpaper, the looming hum of air conditioning units. Garry's Mod transforms these mundane textures into something deeply uncanny, invoking the dread of being trapped in a dream that doesn't want you to wake up. Because the game engine lacks traditional horror mechanics, the fear in Garry's Mod comes purely from atmosphere, echoing the same existential discomfort found in LSD Dream Emulator and Yume Nikki. The creativity of the community has turned this sandbox into a canvas for exploring what it means to feel truly lost, not just spatially, but psychologically. And when combined with sound design pulled from horror game ambience, vaporwave mixes, or even stark silence, Garry's Mod becomes a surreal playground of isolation and unease. From the surreal, nightmarish landscapes of Yume Nikki and LSD Dream Emulator, to the cryptic mysteries of Garry's Mod and petscop, hostile dreamscapes in video games have continuously evolved, finding new ways to unsettle and intrigue players. These games reject traditional horror in favor of something more abstract, worlds that distort logic, where isolation and disorientation become the true sources of fear. As the rise of liminal horror in the backrooms have shown, the unease of empty, forgotten spaces is just as terrifying as any monster lurking in the dark. Games like Interior Worlds capture this fear by immersing players in vast, quiet spaces that feel just a little too empty, while the haunted PS1 demo discs demonstrate how lo-fi graphics and early 3D aesthetics can enhance this dreamlike horror. The jagged polygons, pixelated textures, and the heavy fog of PS1-style games create an uncanny digital landscape, one that feels like a fragmented memory or a dream on the verge of collapsing. These artistic choices don't just replicate nostalgia, they reinforce the feeling of being lost in a world that defies reality, where familiar spaces turn hostile without warning. Ultimately, hostile dreamscapes in video games tap into a unique kind of horror, one that lingers long after the game is over. They prey on your subconscious, leaving us questioning what we just experienced and why it feels so deeply unsettling. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the eerie and unsettling worlds of hostile dreamscapes in video games. This is my first venture into the content creating world. I'm open to constructive feedback in the comments below. But until next time, I hope you sleep tight.